Hello everyone, John Lockland here. I'm the Director of Forum for Democracy International. Welcome to this week's forum, an unusually early morning forum, or I should say late afternoon for our guest in Japan. I'm joined by my co-host Peter Lavelle in Moscow, Jeremy Nell in Cape Town, and by our two guests, Pascal Lottaz in Japan and Mark Sleboda also in Moscow. Pascal, you wrote a very interesting piece the other day, a week or so ago, about the Board of Peace, Trump's the extraordinary ad hoc structure that he cobbled together at Davos, just as everyone was reeling from his various threats over Greenland. Before we get into the Board of Peace, and because we've decided to entitle this show Trump's Foreign Policy, perhaps I could start with a very basic question. Does he have a foreign policy? Does Trump have a foreign policy? If you ask, I don't know, what is the foreign policy of Britain, it's relatively easy to answer that question. It's to remain aligned with America. If you ask what's the foreign policy of France, it's to strengthen the European Union and fashion it in France's image, and so on and so on. But does Trump have one, or is it just endless deployments of the shock doctrine, as I like to call it? In other words, making completely outrageous statements and threats and upping the ante, often with military power as well, screaming and shouting, overthrowing every possible apple cart, leaving everyone dazed, and then moving in to scoop up the ruins. What's your view, Pascal?
I mean, what you just described, I think, is his tactic, his way of implementing what I do think is a policy, or at least in his mind, a strategy that is forming around spheres of influence, period. I think this man thinks in the Western Hemisphere is ours, and we negotiate the rest somehow as beneficial as possible. And if we break something in the process, then well, so be it. He projected a lot of power by just simply abducting the president of Venezuela, right? Kidnapping. I mean, going in and kidnapping a president is, on the one hand, super unproductive in order to really change things on the ground. On the other hand, it's an extreme muscle flex. I mean, the message, especially in Latin America, is I think is well understood, and you can see from how angry people are that it is understood. And I do believe that this bullying tactic, it's a bullying tactic, right? That's how he works. But when we talk about strategy, he has made it clear several times that the Western Hemisphere is ours, Monroe Doctrine 2.0. So this is our yard, our garden. We will chase everybody else out, and we will bully you out if as much as we can. And in other places, we will project as much strength as we can. Even though with Iran, he's showing right now how limited that ability has become, and with Ukraine as well. At the same time, as any bully does, he will never ever give anything away unless you take it back, right? So even with Ukraine, the whole idea is not let's have peace tomorrow. The idea is like, let's make it as costly as possible for Russia, not because he has a claim on that hemisphere, but because why not make it difficult if they don't want to play, right? He constantly thinks in terms of how to create maximum leverage, or how to use the leverage he has over everybody else. So I would say,
do you buy the line that there is a breakdown in the transatlantic relationship, or do you think, as some do, that this is all a game of smoke and mirrors designed to get Europe to pay more for what are essentially American policies?
I think it's both. I mean, on the one hand, you do have a change in the way that the transatlantic alliance works, right? You've a clear change in tone. On the other hand, it will lead to what Brian Berletic and others are calling just a division of labor in order to implement the strategy. So, I mean, but it's done not anymore under the humanitarian guise and all for one for all. It's more like, no, we're the boss. We're telling you what to do, and dog, run. You know you're the dog.
Yeah, sure, but it can't be both, Pascal. It can't be. It can't be both a division of labor and a relationship of dog and master. On the one hand, it can't be both that and a breakdown in the transatlantic alliance. At the time of Davos, shortly before he withdrew his threat of invasion, people said NATO is dead.
Yeah, and NATO, I mean, NATO has been brain dead for quite a while, but the transatlantic alliance, the way that the Europeans thought, it works. And the way they thought what NATO meant, I think that is dead. But NATO as an instrument of power for the United States to direct its satellites is very much there. Very similarly to how the Warsaw Pact has been a good tool in order for the Soviet Union in order to do alliance management, right, or surrounding management. And the United States, for the longest time, pretended that this is a club of equals, which by now is utterly clear. No, if the boss says he actually wants a piece of the cake from one of the others, then the other's gonna at least sweat blood, right? Yeah, so that the old idea, I think, of the Europeans of what NATO was, that one is dead. But NATO as a tool of power, I think, is very much around.
Mark, what's your view? I mean, when the Trump administration took over, Marco Rubio gave an interview explaining that now it was a multilateral world, a multipolar world, and America was ready to talk to the big other powers as an equal and all the rest of it. We don't really hear much of that anymore, do we, Mark?
No, not at all. I don't think Trump as an individual has a strategy, has a grand strategic vision. He has some vague formulations of a great powers foreign policy as might have been conducted by William McKinley back in the 19th century, which seems to be about the only book he's ever read in his life. And he's got his own personal, shall we say, negotiation style, which is that of a mafia don. With lots of threats, what's yours is mine, and he has kind of reformulated American foreign policy on a individual tactical level as a protection racket, as a global protection racket. Now he does have people with strategic vision behind him, right? Elbridge Colby. As the deputy war minister, I guess now, the secretary of war for policy. He is the one who has crafted Trump's national security strategy, national defense strategy, and is trying to implement these things as policy. But both of those documents clearly show that the U.S. desires to withdraw from the Middle East, leaving essentially everything from Iran and some vaguely defined Arab states that they think are aligned with the Abraham Accords to handle things. But this entire giant buildup, regime change buildup that the Trump administration has put in the Persian Gulf shows how, you can write out a foreign policy for Trump, a strategic vision, but it doesn't mean he is going to follow it. And as for the Europeans, I respectfully have to disagree with you, John. I think absolutely on a personal level, there is a major serious rift between the ruling European political elite and Donald Trump. That doesn't necessarily mean that there is a giant transatlantic rift between the United States and between Europe, because Trump is a blip. He is going to be gone in 3 years. And unless J.D. Vance continues him and continues many of the same policies, we will be back to a neocon Marco Rubio or a Democrat who will return to the expected form and rhetoric of the U.S.-led, Western global hegemony, which is what the Europeans really want. So they've adapted a policy of dealing with him and preventing that rift by absolute sycophancy, right? Like rolling over, showing their belly, and crying "daddy." And they've been remarkably good at that, despite all the provocations that Trump has thrown up, including a threat to annex Greenland. And still, they're towing the party line on that. Now, yes, European dignity as a civilization is literally being dragged through the gutter and defecated on. But they're really okay with that as long as that keeps NATO in existence. And as it does, there is no threat to NATO as an organization until there is deep regime change in either the United States or Europe. that's not going to go away. Trump, his administration, they are surface level only.
Well, I mean, to both our guests, are we over intellectualizing this? Trump he's interested in wins. I mean, I don't think he would comprehend our conversation. I think the Greenland story isn't over yet. I think that's still to play out. Why? For strategic reasons? No. For the minerals? No. Oh, legacy. This is what drives him. Pascal, I remember when one of the first times we talked, I asked you about neutrality studies. And I said, Pascal, does psychology play a role in it? And you said, no. And I said, well, maybe it should, okay? Because I think there's an element of here. I agree with almost everything that's been said here, really high-level stuff, but this is not how Trump thinks. And I think that, we have this, I call it the dilemma of common sense. We're using common sense. He doesn't.
Yeah, okay, but what about Israel, Peter? Because
there's always
we can't beat around the bush. Is that is he just an opportunist on Israel? Pascal, go ahead,
guys
Pascal.
take a shot at that one, Pascal.
May I just say one thing, which is, we're seeing currently something very interesting for also like for political science purposes, and it's like how difficult it is to discern the person from the system that is running, right? So on the one hand, we have Donald Trump, but you can clearly see how he has his own problems of running that ship, right? And how he's not running it. One of the reasons why he uses his own Truth Social network, which he built from scratch, right, or had built from scratch, is so that he can tweet out to 3 million people what he would like the case to be or how he wants to portray stuff, and then X and so on, they pick it up, and it's now an informal way for him to make policy pronouncements about the United States. But you can clearly see how others are not on board with that, and the disagreements even with Lindsey Graham, and how silent some of the people in his administration are, like Tulsi Gabbard and so on, and how this entire thing might just not be moving, also the way that he imagines it, and how difficult it is for us to understand. And how the hell are the shots getting called? Who wrote that goddamn strategy paper? And now they came out with a new strategy paper from the Pentagon. It's like their strategy paper of strategy paper, and so on. And again, like, does the United States have a foreign policy? We have different branches that do different things, and Donald Trump is one of them, not an unimportant one, but he's built into an entire system. Even the Venezuela affair, I mean, at some point he must have had different plans in front of him, right? And we can't even be sure that he's the one who picked it, right? So who calls the shots? And this is very, very unclear to me.
Mark, what do you think?
Fair enough.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that Pascal hit on it there, right? That he is trying to run his own foreign policy, while the U.S., I mean, if you want to call it the blob, as Ben Rhodes did, the deep state, the permanent bureaucracy, they're trying to manage him. We heard that from figures within his own previous administration talking openly about how their entire game was to manipulate him, and how successful and how relatively easy that was. Now, it's not always easy. And when he is trying to conduct his own foreign policy by his, screaming capital letters tweets or truths on social media, as Pascal pointed out, then there's probably a scramble every time he does that. To manage it, to limit the damage, or in some cases when it can be done, to follow it through. I remember very much Trump truthing about regime change in Iran. I remember him screaming about 100% tariffs on any country that conducts trade with Iran. And I mean, has anyone heard anything further on any of those issues? No, because some of them is just disappears into the ether as a result of damage control by his administration and the rest of the deep state government. And it's not just social media. He conducts his foreign policy via Steve Witkoff, right? And his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, not the State Department. Why? He doesn't trust the State Department. He doesn't like the State Department. He understands that it is a part of the blob, right? Of the foreign policy elite, with all of the geopolitical, ideological orthodoxy and indoctrination. Now, the Witkoff and Kushner don't have that indoctrination. Even Dan Driscoll, to a certain extent, probably doesn't. On the other hand, they're absolutely incompetent amateurs who have no idea what the hell they're doing in diplomacy and traffic.
And they're Israeli firsters also.
Yeah. Yes. And Israeli firsters. Now, I have no doubt that Trump has his personal disagreements at times with Netanyahu, but I also think that Trump is, to a great extent, politically beholden to certain of his donors. I'm not going to name any names, Adelson, or anything like that. He is obligated to follow an Israel first policy, but he has completely during during his first administration and now during his second administration, to the point where his own administration people, craft a strategy of the U.S. withdrawing from the Middle East. And he moves repeatedly towards, shall we say, faltering steps towards regime change in Iran.
Pascal and Mark, I mean, Pascal, you said that, it's a hemispheric centric foreign policy that Trump has. That's certainly part of it. There are certainly exceptions. We have Israel there. How it's going to play out with NATO, I think that will be determined by the final result in Ukraine. But what is your perception of how Russia and China are reacting to Trump's grasp of the world or view of the world? Because all of us know that international law has always been, international law works for the powerful, meaning great power politics here. But the Russians and the Chinese have to deal with a very unpredictable, erratic president, and that makes them very, very defensive. Okay, Trump's lack of interest in the New START treaty is an example of that, and that has major implications for Russia's foreign policy. So, how are you seeing Russia and China reacting to Trump?
I see both of them basically trying not to play along. I mean, one thing that Donald Trump is doing very, very well is he kicks everybody off, right? He's a master of dominating the not just the narrative, but the way that stuff is approached, right? He can, again, with a single tweet, he can get all of us up and talk about a topic for an entire week, all of us, including me, right? And he's just brilliant at doing that. And you can also see how he keeps himself all options open, because he made his own words meaningless. Just compare, for one instance, all the crazy stuff that Trump says and nothing follows. And then what happened in December with Japan and China, where the Japanese prime minister in a parliamentary hearing or a conversation just said that she would regard Taiwan, an attack by China's mainland on Taiwan, as an existential crisis to Japan. And all the implications that had, and that set off a major, major diplomatic escalation between the two. And words between Japan and China matter. What the prime minister says matters. With the United States, it doesn't anymore. And he created that space where his words don't matter, which also means he has more freedom of action to do stuff that he wants. And I think China and Russia understand that, which means that if you play along, you only empower the dude. So the Chinese said, like, when it came to the tariffs, we have red lines, period. We've been here for 5,000 years, 4,750 of those the United States was not around. So we can wait it out. And Trump had to give in, and Russia too. Like the Trump tried to get to an end of the Ukraine war through a ceasefire. The Russians said, like, no, we are not giving up our Trump card. We're gonna continue. So we're just not gonna play along. And in the end, even what probably was an assassination attempt, they waited that out, saying, like, no, we're just going to continue, because they are highly. The United States is also strategic, but they are more, systematic. about the approach, and the system that both are running works whether the guy is a Biden or a Trump. They figure that out.
Well, I mean, Pascal, you said that it gives him more freedom, this his ability to stop his words from meaning anything, a bit like in Alice in Wonderland. I can make a word mean whatever I want it to mean. It depends who's master. Surely that's also very dangerous. Far from giving him more freedom, it's surely very dangerous for his credibility. I mean, in July last year, we were told that the nuclear program of Iran had been finished off in one fell swoop by bombers flying from Alabama to Iran and back. And then 6 months later, we're told that the gunboats have to be sent to the Persian Gulf in order to force the Iranians to negotiate on this very issue. Now, those two things can't both be true. And surely, just as the Athenians said that, law doesn't matter and the strong will do what they can, but then lost the war, surely this is very quickly going to unravel as a strategy or as a tactic. Trump is a blip. That's yes, I agree with that. Mark is quite right. The blob will reassert its power if it hasn't done so already. But in the meantime, the credibility of the country is surely in tatters. And therefore, it's not, despite all the spectacular show, the Venezuela and so on, the breathtaking show of force, is the effect not exactly the contrary overall?
What you're losing is the trust of the others, right? But they're not after trust. They're just after being able to do things the way you said. The strong do what they can. The weak suffer what they must, right? They look at everybody else as weak. We do whatever we can, and the only question in the main question in the United States is how to sell it to our own population, right? And if you play both cards, you can always say like, "Look, I told you, I told you they had nuclear weapons. Always said so." Or you tell them, "I told you, we destroyed them. They're not around." You keep both options open. Like and it doesn't matter which one is true. The only thing that matters is which one you then want to sell in the future as having been true.
Well, and it's a demonstration that you have the power. You have power. Yeah. I mean, it shows domination. I mean, what the weak think, well, who cares? Okay, and Trump changes his mind. He flips-flops. Well, he's the most powerful nominally speaking, the most powerful person in the world. John is right. This is I will define what reality is, irrespective of what anyone else thinks. Mark, I love when you do that. Go ahead.
First of all, this discussion of what happened in Venezuela being a demonstration of U.S. dominant military force, I have to disagree with that. It was a demonstration of how effective the CIA is at co-opting governments. And that, I believe, is ultimately what really happened. Delcy Rodriguez, the defense minister, Lottaz, others were clearly co-opted through some combination of bribery, blackmail, threats, and they turned Maduro over. Yes, the U.S. Special Forces had to fly in low over an enemy country, over the largest and most fortified military base in Venezuela to retrieve Maduro. But he was essentially handed over by the Venezuelans. Maybe his Cuban security detail fought to defend him. And the fact that he felt that he needed a Cuban security detail and not his own people speaks volumes of its own. But we don't know if the Americans killed him or Venezuelans killed him, the Cubans, right? We don't know that. What we do know is that, while she may be saying some ameliorating things for the Venezuelan people, she has been, essentially subservient. I mean, Dan Ratcliffe, the CIA director, came to Venezuela and she kowtowed to him, and they announced that they're taking over Venezuelan intelligence, just like they did in Ukraine in 2014, and will rebuild it in its own images. So it's a lesson to be afraid of the CIA, but not necessarily of the U.S. military. With regards, Peter pointed out about the reality creation, and Trump within the Western sphere of influence, right? The Western, especially the U.S., but also the Western mainstream media, and I would say even foreign policy wise within the Western sphere of influence, he's post credibility. He's meta, right? They as Karl Rove once supposedly said, they create their own reality and act on it. Now, China and Russia and other countries that are still occupying the real world then have to decide how to deal with it. And China certainly is just ignoring it all. Russia has been playing along to a significant degree, not totally, but they've been feeding him at times. I mean, President Putin tries to manipulate Trump, his ego, and everything else, just like everyone else in the world does, including his own administration, his allies, everyone. And Trump wants it that way. I mean, he imagines himself as the God Emperor of mankind, where everyone comes to his court and pays him court, right? That's expected. Now, how he chooses to react to that sycophancy, from Putin, he sees it as a sign of respect, and he has a certain amount of respect for Putin. That's quite clear. And it's a different relationship. He sees Zelensky as a groveling little, worm, which, to be fair, I think that's an accurate assessment. When it comes to spheres of influence, I think we really need to be careful of thinking that the U.S. is operating within that framework. I know a lot of people toss those words around, but if you are claiming a sphere of influence as a great power within a world of great powers, that also entails that you recognize that other great powers has a sphere of influence that you hesitate to act in, and that's not the case. I don't think that the Trump administration is really moving to that. Maybe there's some people who would like to within the Trump administration, Elbridge Colby, but that's not Trump's foreign policy as he has tried to, direct the Titanic. Instead, what we see is hegemonic retrenchment and reorganization and a pushing of the proxies forward, division of labor. But he's not giving up Taiwan to China. He's not giving up Ukraine to Russia. He's not, the Western hemisphere is my hemisphere, and you're not even allowed to conduct trade here anymore. But I'm also doing everything I can to regime change Iran. There's no recognition of the Eastern hemisphere or that discussion that the U.S. military presence in the Eastern hemisphere or the Fortress Eurasia is a destabilizing influence and shouldn't be there. So that's not really spheres of influence.
Well, no, what it is, Mark, is that what's mine is mine and what is yours is negotiable.
Yeah, it's exactly what I was going to say, Peter. You beat me to it. What about the economic side of this? I mean, obviously, Trump is Mr. Tariffs here, tariffs there, smashing.
Well, that's what I was going to comment on now.
Yes, I know, Jeremy, you wanted to come in on that.
Yeah. So I mean,
so that's one aspect, and then of course the overall, what Mark just said, you mentioned the Titanic. So he's trying to steer it away from the iceberg or whatever. He's trying to, in a very short space of time, because we always forget how limited American presidential power is, both by the checks and balances, the blob, and also in time. But he clearly is trying to make America great again, or at least that's what it seems. But what's the economic dimension? Does it involve,
let me jump in there.
a weak dollar?
Let me jump in there, John. Let me add quickly to what you're saying.
Please do. I was about to. Yeah.
Trump absolutely has foreign policy. I mean, if you look at his tariff wars and his threats of sanctioning, he's actually making China great again. Because here in South Africa, he's got no love for us because we took Israel to court. And with the tariffs that he's imposed on us, which range between 25% and 50%, it's directly affected our exports to the US, which is, for example, my father's business has to now shift focus. It has to move from the US now to the East. That's precisely the consequence of his foreign policy.
And what about the dollar? Because on the one hand, he said he wanted the dollar to remain the world's reserve currency. On the other hand, of course, it's weakening very greatly. Which is that a strategy to improve American exports? Is it a desired devaluation? The gold price, after all, has rose by 50% since he took office in the White House last year. Again, is this just straightforward protectionism and mercantilism, or is it in fact him losing control? How do you see that, Pascal?
Well, I mean, I see it as a consequence of the way that he conducts foreign policy, but not only him. I mean, let's also remember Biden, and it started way before that. The United States started to push the structural card too much. The reason why the U.S. has had this empire is because it was a global service provider, right? It provides the good part of software, internet, Microsoft, Facebook, whatsoever. It provides a good part of the payment system, and it directs investments into developing or global South countries through the IMF and World Bank, through the structures it created before, through GATT and then the WTO. But the moment that these things become like slightly something different from how they wanted to use it, they transform from tools of power into tools of actual, multipolar engagement. The United States shut down the WTO because it doesn't appoint judges to the appellate court. The thing is dead. Shutting down others, and he then puts too much stress on them, right? With the sanctions against Russia, secondary sanctions against everybody. Sanctions in this sense can work when you use them targeted against certain countries. I mean, work in the sense of confining them. Look at how confined North Korea was for the longest time, and how actually North Korea is one of the beneficiaries. Thank you, from the current turmoil, because suddenly they can do agreements with Russia. Suddenly they don't look that crazy anymore, right, for having nuclear weapons. When they say like, yeah, well, look, I mean, there were reasons. So they're coming out of that isolation because the US is weakening this global infrastructure that it has built by trying to put too much pressure on everybody. So right now we are still running on that operating system. We're still running on Windows, but everybody's looking for a way out, and everybody goes like, where can we get the next best Linux in order to somehow change the way we operate? This takes time. But China's building on it, Russia's building on it, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, and so on. And that's something that angers Trump. And what does he do? He just tries to double down, which is just going to speed up the rate of decline.
Mark, that ties in with what I said in my question a moment ago, that actually he is far from preventing the decline, he is accelerating. Is that how you see it, Mark?
That's a consequence, I think, inevitably. I mean, it is the classic trope from the Star Wars, A New Hope, the first movie, of the more you tighten your grip, the more star systems will slip through your fingers. At some level, there's a recognition by Trump, and certainly within people of his administration, that keeping the U.S. as the global, the dollar as the global reserve currency, and simultaneously the pursuit of U.S.-led Western global hegemony and primacy is extremely expensive. In fact, it's becoming crippling. Certainly Trump feels a great deal of resentment, contempt towards Europe in that. He's, and that is shared by a certain percentage of the U.S. elite, where they've had welfare societies with all of these luxuries like, free or subsidized education and healthcare and the like. And Americans have never had those things, so they don't understand that at all. They think the Europeans have been free riding on U.S. hegemony. So there is an attempt to burden share and a division of labor. And his tariff policy is, again, at one level, it's Trump idealizing the presidency of William McKinley for whatever strange reason. On the other hand, we've had economic officials within the Trump administration, right, speak about the tariff policy on the White House website, saying how it's not an attempt to give up hegemony. It's making the rest of the world pay for it by tariffs. And they said it in those terms, right? That's the tariff policy. Now, is that going to work? Of course it's not. right? And its weaponization started under the Biden administration, but certainly continued of, these institutions of U.S. hegemony, right? Of their control of the global financial architecture, the payment systems and the like. It's gone too far. And it's one thing to do that to North Korea and Syria, but their attempt to, inflict a strategic defeat on Russia via those mechanisms has utterly failed. And that has led the whole system into crisis. And BRICS Plus forming, at the very least, the nascent capability of forming a parallel system, because there's a recognition that the U.S. is no longer a reliable provider of those global public goods that Pascal mentioned.
If we could switch gears, guys, how to explain Trump's Iran policy? It's been very, very.
Have you got a chip plugged into my brain, Peter?
Well, great minds do think alike, John. But Pascal and Mark, how are you? There seems to be a stepping back here, but there was a stepping back in June of last year as well, and there was an attack. So I take all of this with a grain of salt. And if we have time, the negotiations over Ukraine, again, people are in a vacuum. I mean, it's actually the Ukrainians are negotiating with the Americans, and the Americans are negotiating with Russia, but there's no Ukraine-Russia negotiations. And it's very, very distorted. But if we could stick with Iran, because I talked so much about Ukraine over the last few years.
Yeah.
How do both of you see Trump's policy? Because the fat lady hasn't sung yet. Go ahead.
Absolutely.
If I may start, I had this conversation yesterday on my channel with Rainer Rupp, a former East German spy in West Germany,
Right.
and a great strategic analyst. And he made a very, very good point, which is like, look, the US has made a naval buildup in front of Iran before, 2012 and 2007. And both of them were larger than the current one. Both times they had 2 or 3 aircraft carriers there. Right now they park 1. So it's even though the rhetoric is the most belligerent of these 3 times, it is actually with the weakest force available. It's also at a time when a lot of the missile systems that the United States have been used up. I mean, the extended United States, right, in Ukraine, but also in Israel, a lot of this has been used up. They still have a good number, but they take actually a long time to bring in place. And even if all of these ships shoot at once, it's going to be gone. So in terms of like what these militaries can do directly, it's actually a pretty weak force. On the other hand, they did try the regime change with activating all of their assets, and I guess that was the primary strategy. And somehow I see it as like a mismatch of coordination. The ships kind of arrived late. So, and now what do? We continue posturing and something, but at the moment I do believe that Iran is actually calling the bluff. And I mean, it already defused the main attack line, and now the question is, how does he? What happens with what's left that kind of came too late? That's how I interpret it, at least for the moment.
And what use is an aircraft carrier anyway? Surely an aircraft carrier is a sitting duck, even for Iran.
And not only that, you don't even have to sink the thing. You just need to damage the tamarack, right? You just need to one little thing. You don't need to sink it, and it's going to be decommissioned, right? Or you need to go to repair. So it's, in a sense, this is not a very good, useful force that he has built up. Plus the other sitting ducks that sit in Qatar and in Syria and so on. It's like, that's why the US says, like, guys, we better evacuate a couple of people because well, this could get really ugly for us. I mean, besides the fact that they can kill thousands and thousands of Iranians. I mean, overnight, immediately, 4 a.m. So that is still there. But winning is a different issue.
Mark, as Peter said, the fat lady hasn't sung yet. What do you think she'll sing when she does?
Okay, so Iran. Israel, Netanyahu sees, of course, a a brief window of opportunity. He understands that he will never have a more preferable U.S. administration that he can push to do things, and he wants the U.S. to fight a regime change war against Iran for him. And we've already seen 2 episodes of that, right? The first one was the Israeli decapitation strike, where they imagined that they could overthrow the Iranian government by activating some Mossad assassinations and standoff strikes out of Iraqi airspace, and that didn't work. It quickly turned into a long-range strike war of attrition, where Iran was gaining the upper hand, and the U.S. had to come in, drop some bombs, declare victory, and demand a ceasefire, which Iran...
You're referring to the 12-day war of last summer.
The 12-day war of last year. Now, this time around was another Mossad and CIA-led insurgency attempt, and it was intended to roll right into a military regime change. Again, they constantly underestimate the strength of and stability of the Iranian government and the amount of support it has within what is still a majority of the Iranian population. So the CIA and Mossad insurgency faltered rather quickly. Apparently, Russian technology, at least according to Forbes, was used to not only shut down Starlink, and able to track the terminals, helping Iranian counterintelligence to get all of the CIA and Mossad assets. You're right, there was a gap in timing. The U.S. forces arrived, and now it's like, well, what do we do? And he's demanded a quick regime change, and the Pentagon's told him, Iran's not Venezuela. That's not going to happen. So now I don't think they really know what to do. It doesn't mean that they've stopped trying, but ultimately, the big problem here is the U.S. and Israeli, but the U.S. Achilles heel of air defense. They don't have enough. They don't have competent air defense systems, whether we're talking the Patriot or the THAAD or anything. They don't even have much else. And they by far do not have the production rate of interceptors for either the Patriot or the THAAD system that they need. I mean, they don't even have a fraction of what they need for Ukraine, for Israel, for the Pentagon, for all the allies around the world. Raytheon is still at 650 PAC-3 interceptors a year, and the THAAD less than 100. So whatever they do, they need a quick regime change, because if that doesn't happen, some quick decapitation strike that they imagine they could do, which I don't think they can, then we're right back in June of 2025, long-range strike war of attrition, and ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, long-range strike drones. Ultimately, Iran has far more of them. They're far cheaper and ultimately far more effective than the far more expensive and hard to produce American and Israeli air defense. And this is a hard power U.S. geopolitical limitation, not only with regards to Iran, but with regards to any country that now has the ability to strike back against the U.S. And that the proliferation of drone technology has made that theoretically that could be anyone, including Yemen, including the Houthis, who are capable of driving the U.S. out of the Red Sea because the costs involved. Now, Venezuela didn't follow the evolutions of military power. They didn't concentrate. They didn't build. If Venezuela had built a Garan network, even a nascent one in the last few years, piggybacking off Russian, developments in Ukraine, then we wouldn't have the situation in Venezuela. But Iran has. In fact, the Garan is extremely effective Russian wonder weapon, and I don't mind using that terminology because that's a real wonder weapon, was originally developed by the Iranians. Yes, it's gone under many stages of war evolution since then, but it's not going to work with Iran. They have too much of a long-range strike capability. The U.S. doesn't have competent and enough air defense, and these are entirely new hard geopolitical realities in the Middle East.
Yeah, so the Karl Rove creator of reality and the TV reality or unreality TV showman has come up against reality.
Yep.
Very much.
I mean, we hope so, right? I mean, the hope is that at some point they will realize, no, this needs you need an off ramp, right? And maybe, one of the things that I believe is worth keeping in mind is that for all the stupid things that Trump has done, I do think that trying to have a third world war is not one of them. I think he actually tries to somehow do this in a whatever he wants to do without going into the nuclear realm. Like, look at the things he didn't do. One is that since 1 year ago, the United States has now basing rights in Sweden and Finland. And except for one base, they didn't staff the other 30 that they would be allowed legally now with what they did to put that. So they are there seems to be hesitancy to actually go over and beyond Ukraine, right? So Ukraine, yes, again, like what's mine is mine, what's yours is negotiable. We negotiate that, but we don't do that in these very, very precarious areas, at least for now. That's
well, I mean, Pascal, I don't want to go into the doomsday realm, but as Mark and I have spoken recently, I mean, and he repeated it here, Israel has the most pliant president it could ever imagine in the White House, and Israel is attempting to solve all of its problems at the same time, and we've seen that. Does it ever enter your mind that for the final prize, Iran, that Israel would resort to nuclear weapons?
Yes,
it's a rogue state for so many people. I mean, you got to condemn them. I mean, they're in that category right now.
The highest likelihood of a state using nuclear weapons is definitely Israel, because again, like the Israel's entire strategy of survival is to make sure everybody else burns. That's just like, just put fire there and then little by little encroach upon that, right? And the Golan Heights and whatnot, and genocide in Gaza and West Bank extermination and so on and so on. But you need everybody else to be basically living under constant assault, and they want to expand that to Iran. And the only reason Egypt is not being targeted directly is because it's more or less playing ball. Right, but everybody else is being fired on, and the point is not to win. The point is just to make sure that everybody else is so weak that Israel somehow can thrive in that. And if nuclear weapons are needed to implement that strategy, I believe they will.
I'm struggling a little bit here, though. Why hasn't Israel used nuclear weapons? I mean, okay, so let's assume now they've violated every international treaty ever. They're flattening Gaza. And all we ever hear is, it could happen. Why haven't they?
Well, they haven't. It hasn't been necessary for their survival.
But what would happen? What actually would happen?
Every other Arab country in the Middle East would start a nuclear program.
Exactly.
That's what would happen. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, they would all develop nuclear weapons. That's what would happen. And not to mention Iran.
Okay, or you could just buy one from Pakistan.
But I'm struggling with the morality here. So it's okay to flatten Gaza using everything else, but the moment you go anywhere near a nuclear weapon, then suddenly you've crossed some sort of line.
Yes, very much.
It's an ultima ratio, and we haven't reached that end stage yet. From the viewpoint of the Israelis, I would say. I mean, you keep that thing for the very, very end. And at the moment, things are going relatively well. I mean, could be better, but you successfully pulled off a genocide on Gaza.
No, hang on, Pascal. Hang on.
Hezbollah have been mauled.
To be fair, Israel is just defending itself.
I'm glad that in this round of
what's mine is yours.
We can laugh at how horrible that is, right? But there's seriously people who, if they listen to us, they would want us behind bars.
I want to push back on one thing. And that's the idea that Trump is doing his utmost to avoid World War III.
Not his utmost.
Maybe he thinks that, but I want to point out that while he has shifted away from overt military support of the Kiev regime in favor of having the Europeans pay for the U.S. equipment, and that's not working out very well, he has escalated the CIA war on Russia to a level that the Biden administration never did. Now, in the pages of the New York Times, the CIA has bragged over the last couple of years that they completely took over and rebuilt Ukrainian intelligence in their own image. And then more recently, that they directed the Kiev regime's attack on Russian oil refiners and energy infrastructure, and that they directed the attacks on civilian oil shipping in the Black Sea, the Med, the Atlantic, and beyond. And then we have this mass drone attempted assassination attempt, which was carried out by Ukrainian intelligence against the Russian presidential state residence in Novgorod region at Valdai. Is there anyone who believes then that the U.S. wasn't at the very least in the loop and greenlit an assassination attempt on the Russian president? Because I don't believe that for a second, that they weren't in that loop, didn't at least greenlight that. That means that Trump just tried to assassinate the leader of the world's largest nuclear power and the most
Mark, do you believe that he was in the loop on that?
Absolutely.
Or you think he was?
I think absolutely he was, because he seems to think that there's a disconnect, that whatever he does with intelligence happens below the fact that anyone can recognize it and react on it. So I very much think that he was, on the loop for it. He loves decapitation strikes, right? We've seen him being involved with the attempted decapitation strike against the Iranian leadership, with Hamas, with Hezbollah, with Venezuela.
Soleimani.
Oh, yes, he assassinated. We can't forget the assassination of Soleimani and Iraqi generals, which were killed at the same time as well. So he seems to have a fetish for it, him and Netanyahu both. And it's such an absurd fantasy, because the only thing that would result if they successfully assassinated Putin is that would be a 100% guarantee, which I already think is an inevitability, but it would be a 100% guarantee that Ukraine would lose their statehood and would simply be reabsorbed into Russia, because Russia would not stop. And whatever Russian leader replaced Putin would be far less restrained, less cold-blooded, and less pragmatic than he was.
Pascal.
And public opinion would support it.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Pascal, let's have a last word from you.
This is the one thing I cannot judge, and one thing that we need to find out once the documents are released. Did Trump know? Was he in the loop or not? Is the CIA under effective control of the White House or not, or is it like a state within a state? And would we have so many like dead US presidents if there was not all of this infighting? And there were at least 2, if not 3 attempts on Trump's life while he ran and after. I mean, I don't know again how this system runs, but the point I wanted to make before is not that Trump tries his utmost to avert a third world war. He's definitely playing with fire in a very, very irresponsible way and a dumb way. But he's not Hitler. He doesn't have that mindset of conquest on blood and gore for glory. I think I think there's a difference. I would, saying somebody is not Hitler is not a great compliment, but I think it's a distinction that we should make to understand at least how this administration runs. That doesn't mean that there is not Hitlerite types in the administration. I think he has Hitlerite types.
And he is obsessed with this notion of peace. And again, you can say it's all for show. Maybe it is. But on the other hand, why would he keep returning to that theme?
He just wrote to the Prime Minister of Norway that because he wasn't given the Nobel Prize of Peace, he no longer feels the need to create, to maintain the facade of working for peace. So
that is rather Hitlerian, isn't it? Because of course in 1939 Hitler said, "I've always struggled for peace, but now I've been pushed too far." Okay, well, indeed, we have to wait for, as you say, the archives and maybe other evidence to find out who is really controlling whom. I'm not sure if we have got any closer to the truth, but it's been absolutely fascinating listening to you both, Pascal and Mark. Thank you very much for joining us, and thanks to everyone for watching, and we see you all again next week. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank
you
you
very
Bye.
much.
Thank you.